Hi there, you're listening to Ukraine Talks, a Euromaidan Press weekly podcast where two Kyiv-based Ukrainian journalists, Ivan Verstyuk and Serge Havrylets, discuss the latest developments in and around Ukraine and try to give you a bigger picture of what's going on. Before diving into the topics we want to talk about in more detail, let's first briefly summarize what happened last week. Russia continued to rain long-range missiles and kamikaze drones on Ukrainian cities. A massive missile attack on the Ukrainian capital Kyiv on February 7th killed 4 people. 40 people were wounded. Apart from using Russian-made missiles, the Russian army launched North Korean missiles. Several regions of Ukraine were attacked. Civilians were killed in eastern, southern, and northern parts of the country. This is what Ukrainians are going through almost every day. Earlier this week, the Ukrainian air defense shot down a new Shahed kamikaze drone with a jet engine made of Western components. Josep Borrell, a high representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, visited Kyiv this week and had to hide from the Russian aerial assault in a bomb shelter. The US Congress continued discussions over the Ukraine aid. Ukrainian long-range kamikaze drones hit targets in Russia, striking oil refineries and a factory that produces rocket engines for the Russian army. On February 8th, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed the Commander-in-Chief General Valerii Zaluzhnyi and replaced him with Colonel General Alexander Syrsky. Meantime, the Russian army continued its winter offensive, trying to encircle the Ukrainian stronghold in Avdiivka in the Donetsk region, the eastern part of the country. The Dutch defense minister announced that the Netherlands will send 6 additional F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. This latest commitment increases the total number of aircraft pledged to Ukraine by the Netherlands to 24. American journalist Tucker Carlson visited Moscow and interviewed Russian President Vladimir Putin. A Russian army sonar that collected intelligence was found on the Lithuanian coast, a NATO member state. Canada is considering the possibility of supplying decommissioned CRV-7 missiles to Ukraine. The Russian army killed 2 French volunteers in eastern Ukraine. The latest poll by the Levada Center, a Russian independent, non-governmental polling and sociological research organization, showed that the majority of Russians still support the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, let's talk in more detail about the reshuffle in the Ukrainian military command. Ivan, what do you think about it?
The decision made by our President Zelensky to replace General Zaluzhnyi has been largely anticipated in Ukraine and is seen as highly unpopular move, since General Zaluzhnyi is this symbolic figure, symbolic personality that's associated with Ukraine's initial success on the battlefields that we had during initial stage of the war in 2022. General Zaluzhnyi has a large following on social media, and he's very vocal on what he thinks about current warfare, publishing these popular articles in the Western media like The Economist and CNN, talking the same language that NATO is using and finding arguments for why this war is becoming so hard to fight. Zaluzhnyi was very good at explanations of why Ukrainian army is having problems. And so far replacing him with General Syrsky is largely seen as a political move here in Ukraine. Well, to describe Syrsky, he is rather an old school general who received his primary military education in Russia. That I'd rather say this is his strength, since he knows the Russian warfare well, as he was studying in Russia. But on the other hand, he has much higher risk tolerance. He is much more classical in understanding warfare, while Zaluzhnyi was rather betting on having innovations in the battlefields, in the combat zones. And I think in the coming weeks, we'll see that the Russian army will try to give our new commander-in-chief an exam to see what his strategy and what his tactics is. President Zelensky, obviously, by replacing Zaluzhny, he expects Ukraine to have a large-scale counter-offensive operation this year, trying to regain all of our territories. Despite the talks from the West and from our NATO partners that Ukraine needs to shift to the strategic defense mode, or some call it active defense mode, Zelensky is not really happy with the idea of having strategic defense, since this will allow the war to go for another year, maybe 2 years, and he's not prepared to and doesn't want to have a long-term war. It's exhausting, it's hard to fight, it's expensive, and the losses will be bigger. So to me, the key decision-making logic behind replacing Zaluzhny is that Zelensky believes that General Syrsky will be more successful in doing counter-offensive operation, though on the other hand, this will definitely come with more losses in the Ukrainian army, which is a tragedy and which is the biggest problem why the Ukrainians don't really want to join the army at a scale that they were doing this in the beginning of the war. Serhiy, what's your thinking about why Zelensky has replaced Zaluzhny?
I'm actually, as a Ukrainian citizen, upset because of this decision. I think it is a mistake. Zaluzhny was an extremely popular commander among Ukrainian citizens. 88% of Ukrainians supported the decisions Zaluzhny made during these 2 years of full-scale Russian invasion. And Zelensky decided to reset and change the military leadership, but I don't see any new approaches, because we all know that a small Soviet army cannot defeat the bigger Soviet army, which is the Russian army. Actually, the Russian army uses these Soviet-type approaches. They don't count the casualties. They have a lot of resources. Ukraine doesn't have that. Ukraine cannot afford that, and the value of life in Ukraine is much higher than it is in Russia. So, as to Alexander Syrsky, he, of course, is a successful general. He was responsible for the defense of Kyiv during the Russian siege of the Ukrainian capital in 2022. He was also in charge of the most successful Ukrainian counteroffensive operation during these 2 years of all-out war. I mean, the Kharkiv offensive, when Ukraine liberated a large chunk of its territory. But still, I'm not very optimistic, because General Zaluzhny, he didn't study at Soviet military school. He didn't attend classes in Moscow, unlike Alexander Syrsky. So he didn't have that kind of mentality. He actually used new methods and new approaches. He transformed the Ukrainian army, made it a drone-oriented army, and I'm not sure that Alexander Syrsky can keep up these transformations. But the positive thing is that, as far as I know, Alexander Syrsky invited young Ukrainian generals who proved effective during this war, and I hope that the new leadership will adequately assess the challenges that Ukraine has, and I'm not sure that Ukraine is ready for a new round of counteroffensive. We lack resources, and the American military aid is stalled. We all understand that Ukraine is a small country, and Russia is the biggest country in the world with one of the most powerful armies in the world. So I don't know.
Let me add just two things that's important for us to understand. General Zaluzhny, who has been in the position of Ukraine's commander-in-chief for almost 2 years of full-scale war, though he was appointed before the war started, he has this vast experience of fighting the war, directing the war, and having access to all kinds of data and information, including military intelligence. Even the president of Ukraine doesn't have that much access to information about the war as Ukraine's commander-in-chief has. And so we've had hopes that General Zaluzhny's experience will still be present in the military decision-making at the highest level. But what we saw is that President Zelensky dismissed Zaluzhny's place at the Security and Defense Council. This is a governmental agency that is overseeing Ukraine's security and military policies. And I was hoping that Zaluzhny would keep his seat there and will be able to contribute with his ideas on how the war needs to be fought further. But Zelensky decided that Zaluzhny should be taken out of that Security Council. And then another thing I want to add is that Zaluzhny got us used to having this high statistics of casualties and losses among the Russian army. Each day, the general staff of Ukrainian army's Facebook page is publishing statistics and how many Russian soldiers are deadly. And General Zaluzhny, he was behind the statistics, which had up to 1,000 Russian soldiers getting killed on the battlefields daily. That's pretty high indicator, and it wasn't as high during all days and months of the war. So we'll keep close attention to the statistics of Russian losses, which will be, a statistical evidence of how efficient Ukraine's new commander-in-chief, General Syrsky, will be. We have the statistics to compare accomplishments of General Zaluzhny with General Syrsky. Today, I've just checked the statistics. It's still as high as it used to be. 950 Russian soldiers dead during first day on the job of General Syrsky. We hope he will at least be able to keep this rate as high as it is now. But it remains to be seen what Syrsky's take on the war will be. I believe it's going to be different from Zaluzhny's take, and I think it's not necessarily going to be more successful, but it's likely bring the intensity of war, intensity of fighting slightly higher.
Of course, we cannot verify the data provided by the Ukrainian General Staff about the Russian casualties, but what we do know is that Russia loses a lot of armored vehicles, tanks, artillery systems. All of this is verified by open source intelligence analysts, and Russian resources are also not infinite. Russia may actually run out of tanks within 2 years, run out of armored vehicles, and so I agree that the job of the Ukrainian army is to continue this war of attrition, and maybe counteroffensive operations wouldn't be that of a great idea, because maybe the counteroffensive of the Ukrainian army last year, without, of course, the air support that is needed to be successful at that counteroffensive, the lack of results, maybe urged the president of Ukraine consider the dismissal of the military command. But I'm not sure about the future of this war. All I know is that Russia has allies that have no limitations. Russia gets ammunition, long-range missiles from North Korea. This is something that Ukraine doesn't get from Western allies. I mean, in those volumes that Russia can get from North Korea. North Korea provided Russia with 1 million artillery shells, and the European Union pledged to support Ukraine in this, and they failed to actually provide Ukraine with 1 million shells. And unlike the United States or Germany that have these long-range missiles like ATACMS or Taurus that Ukraine desperately needs to disrupt Russian logistics in the occupied territories, Russia does have that support from North Korea, and we see that on the battlefield. So now Ukraine lacks ammunition, and the situation near Avdiivka is critical. Russia may actually force the new Ukrainian military command to consider withdrawing from Avdiivka, and maybe that would be the first hard decision that Syrskyi would have to make. I don't know, we will see about that. Okay, let's talk about Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin. How do you like this interview, Ivan?
The first thing I paid attention to is how many views it's getting. I've just checked the number of views on Tucker Carlson's X page, and it has 170 million views. That's very interesting. I believe that's one of the most popular interviews in the history of the world's media. However, what I would add is that X social network should apply the technical measures to see what kind of views those are. I suspect that Russian Russian side could be artificially creating these fake accounts who would go to Carlson's page and increase the number of views. And I believe that this is a very good opportunity for tech specialists at X Network to see how the Russian troll factory works on social media, and to see whether those are in place here. Well, I do believe that all the questions that Tucker Carlson was putting to Vladimir Putin, they were prearranged. That's the reason why this American journalist of a pro-Trump ideological stance. That's why he hasn't asked anything about war crimes of the Russian army committed on the Ukrainian territory, neither about massacre in Bucha, nor about killing civilians in Mariupol, which are probably two biggest examples of how violent the Russian army is. So I'm sure that it was like Putin's decision that he's going to give the interview only if he sees the questions in advance and gets a chance to present his view of the war. While most of the talk was on history matters, and I think like this substantial part of those viewers, 170 million viewers who watched this interview, they were exposed to the history of Eastern Europe for the first time in their lives. I do not think that many of those people know too much about, ancient Ukraine and Middle Ages um, in Ukrainian history. That's why it's really dangerous that the first time they hear about this is Vladimir Putin's version of events. But on the other hand, I do think that if Putin has only history to talk about during such symbolic and interview and such a massive appearance in the media, is that he lacks any other arguments. And this comes as a sign that Kremlin strategists who plan Putin's appearances, who plan his messaging for the audience, they have run out of ideas on what else to tell the world, to tell their own domestic audience besides history. It wasn't like this before, but I do believe that Vladimir Putin just has nothing left in his arsenal of ideas to offer. What he was doing is what he was advertising the totalitarian rule that he's organized in Russia during more than 23 years of being in power in Kremlin, to all those radicals in the West who are disappointed about how democracy works, about what kind of weaknesses democratic systems have. And Putin believes that he is able to be popular with those people, like guys who organized the resurrection on January 6th, 2021 in Washington, D.C. He's talking exactly to those kind of radicals, and he hopes that voters of this type will be able to shift the international discussion on the future of Ukraine's war against Russian invasion to the trajectory that Putin wants to see. It's highly unlikely that the angry radical mob is able to contribute anything to the diplomatic discussion in any ways, but Vladimir Putin has just nothing left that he could say otherwise. Just like Vladimir Lenin, first leader of the Soviet Union, was talking about this global communist revolution, so Putin is going to in this same track while he's trying to amplify dissatisfaction with democracy and even lead this radical group of people who don't like democracy and liberal order and being their leader. What's your take on and why do you think this is an important interview, or maybe not?
I don't think this interview is important because I mean it will have limited influence on the public opinion in the United States and in the West. And I think, of course, Tucker Carlson said that he came to Russia to interview Vladimir Putin because Americans are unaware of what is going on in Russia and Ukraine. But Vladimir Putin is not a reliable source of information about Russia or Ukraine. And his take on history is dubious. I mean, historical myths that he was talking about, they can be debunked with a few clicks. People who wanna find out if the Ukrainian state existed before Soviet Russia occupied Ukraine in the beginning of the 20th century, they can actually see that the Ukrainian state was independent by 1922 when the Soviet Union was formed and Russia occupied Ukraine. And the territory of that independent Ukrainian state included Crimea, included even the bigger territory than Ukraine has now. So what Putin was talking about is completely irrelevant. The only thing that he demonstrated once again is a total disrespect to the international law, national borders. And even though Carlson didn't ask the Russian president uncomfortable questions, Putin was not convincing in what he was talking about. And I think that Tucker Carlson was shocked when he faced this historical discussion, which took a large part of the conversation. Even Tucker Carlson said that it was a filibustering technique that he was using. And I was not surprised about the narrative that Putin used, but I was surprised about Tucker Carlson. I actually was upset about Tucker Carlson's failure to ask any uncomfortable questions. He had a chance to talk to a wanted war criminal, Vladimir Putin, and he had a chance to ask him really uncomfortable questions, but he didn't do that. I actually wanted to hear Putin talk about, of course, the Bucha massacre, indiscriminate shelling of residential areas in Ukrainian cities, torture chambers in occupied territories of Ukraine, deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia, missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian grain storages, the losses of the Russian army in Ukraine, which he totally ignored, murders of Russian journalists in Russia, poisoning of the Russian ex-spy Sergei Skripal, murder of the Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov just 200 meters away from Kremlin, imprisonment of Russian politician Alexei Navalny. And we didn't hear anything of that because Tucker Carlson didn't ask any questions like that. He was not interested in that. And I'm not saying that I'm surprised he didn't ask about Yevgeny Prigozhin's death or annexation of Crimea for other Ukrainian regions, censorship of internet and TV in Russia, deployment of nukes to Belarus, meddling with US elections in 2016. I'm not surprised, but I'm really upset about it, and I wanted to hear Putin talk about it. And it was a totally comfortable discussion for Vladimir Putin. So I don't think it's something that can influence public opinion in the West. To be honest.
And the funny thing, I noticed in the interview, there was this quote that I paid attention to, answering one of the questions. Putin says, and I'm going to quote, when I say partners, I mean special services, end of the quote. So it feels like the man just keeps living in the world where like KGB and CIA are like the biggest decision makers in the global politics. It looks like Putin's like calendar is still stuck somewhere at 1991 when the Soviet Union was collapsing. Vladimir Putin just doesn't notice anything happening besides this, Cold War era tension between KGB that he worked for and American intelligence agency. That makes him, live in this world of lies and secrets where he doesn't trust any official information. He doesn't take what democratic leaders say at face value. He doesn't trust anyone. Though what's important that he says when he mentions lots of American presidents in his speech. He mentions Bill Clinton. He mentions both Bush Senior and Bush Jr. And he's like, oh, I'm okay with finding common language with any American president. I think that was a sign he was making to Donald Trump when if he's going to get elected this year as U.S. president. Well, Putin's saying like, come on, I've been able to talk to your predecessors, and I'm all right with making the political agreements. It's just that people around American president who are blocking the fruitful relationship that Russia and America could enjoy. But overall, I think this was like, something of a museum of Russian totalitarianism. What we saw, it's not like Vladimir Putin is now a politician who responds to what realistically happens in the battlefields in Ukraine, to what realistically happens in Russia, which has like a pretty big economic crisis with utility services unfunctioning in lots of places for the deficit of investments. And obviously Russia is it's feeling the pain of war, but Vladimir Putin doesn't react and respond to anything happening in real life. He just keeps lecturing, which tells you that he is outdated, living in his own world of lies and secrets, and isn't even able to step out of his comfort zone and see and face the truth. That makes him probably not a very good negotiator, and maybe will be used as an argument that with a guy who explains his decisions by something that happened 1,000 years ago is just not a real politician, but rather something that needs to be placed in a museum.
The funny thing is that I noticed the reaction to Putin's rant about the Ukrainian history was not even accepted positively by Russian military bloggers who report from Ukraine, support the invasion of Ukraine, and support Russian propaganda. I saw a joke that is very popular on Russian social media, on Telegram. They actually made fun of Vladimir Putin, who was talking about the history of Ukraine, and they made a small video like in Star Wars with a context when before the movie starts, we see that huge text on the screen, and unlike Star Wars, Putin's rant about the history of Ukraine was totally irrelevant. And what we can see about this state of mind that Putin is in is that everything he's interested in is conspiracy theories and his obsession about destroying the Ukrainian state. So I agree that he's not a reliable negotiator. Russia actually didn't abide by any agreements that it had with Ukraine. Russia doesn't respect national borders of Ukraine. Russia doesn't respect international order, and we saw that in this interview. Putin was talking about history from the point of view of a dictator who actually is set to change national borders. And what surprised me is Putin's comments about the invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany. Putin actually admitted that the logic of Adolf Hitler's actions in 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland, was pretty clear to him. And this is another time when we see that this guy, Vladimir Putin, is a war criminal and an inadequate person. But okay, let's wrap it all up with another topic. Let's talk about the potential confiscation of Russian frozen assets in the West, because Russia actually has to pay for this illegal and unprovoked invasion of a sovereign country in Europe. What do you think about it?
This is a huge issue. So let me first get you the figures. Russia has its central bank reserves at volume of approximately $300 billion US dollars, huge amount of money frozen, but not yet confiscated. So this money, most of it, 150 billion, kept in the financial infrastructure of Belgium, a country in Northern Europe. And while we all argue about who should be contributing financially to Ukraine's fight against Russian brutal invasion, this huge amount of money keeps lying on the banking accounts and in the financial infrastructure of the West, European countries, as well as the United States, and we're still not able to use it, most of it, to fund Ukraine's fight, which is, a big controversy. The U.S. Congress has been having weeks of really heated and polarized discussion on 60 billion bucks for Ukraine, while 300 billion bucks are out of range for Ukraine so far. Well, it's not that the Europeans are idiots. No, the logic of the European Union and the reason for why it hasn't yet transferred those funds for Ukraine is that they think that the frozen assets of Russian central bank are such a big sum of money that should be kept as a collateral. So like a negotiation point with Russia, Moscow, and Vladimir Putin. So what European politicians want to tell Russia is like, if you step back and retreat and get your army away from the Ukrainian territory, you'll get your money back. So that's like, could be the price for retreat of the Russian army from Ukraine. But personally, I do not believe that Putin cares about money that much. If economy, money, and reserves would be his priority, he wouldn't invade Ukraine in the first place. He is driven more about his imperialistic ambitions. And I think realistically, Russia has already said bye-bye to those money. But they said there was a statement from Russian government that they will be fighting in courts in case those money will be transferred for Ukraine's needs. So far, the situation is that the United States Senate made a preliminary bill that it would agree with confiscating the frozen assets, while the Europeans say we can't confiscate the money and can't give them to Ukraine. We just can give the Ukraine interest earned on that amount of money and taxes that we collect on them, which is like peanuts, couple of $1 billion that wouldn't matter much to Ukraine. So my vision for this is that Ukraine should be much more active in getting those money, not begging and asking and requesting the West to give it to us, but move actively forward. And for that, what we need is first to make a domestic legal decision within the Ukrainian legislation that we are confiscating that money, right? This decision could be made by the Ukrainian parliament, and this decision could be executed by Ukraine's Security and Defense Council. The Security Council is exactly in charge of sanctions, economic measures, and confiscations. So why can't we just pass a law on confiscating Russian assets and then make the Security Council to implement this, or it would go to Belgium, to the Belgian government, and say, here, we have a legal decision from Ukraine Security Council on confiscating Russian money. Give it to us. If the Belgian government refuses, then the Ukrainian Security Council could go to a court in Belgium and demand giving that money to Ukraine, which is formally not a reparation, because reparation is something that is being paid deliberately. So reparations would require Russian agreeing to pay that money. So it's not reparation, it's a confiscation. Well, and another thing I'd like to add to this, I've read the discussion on confiscating Russian frozen assets in the Financial Times, like a big influential business newspaper, and it was saying like, oh, come on, guys, if we take away Russian money, that none of the states will be keeping their central bank reserves in the Western financial system. And they meant China, of course, first and foremost, because China has more than 3 trillion US dollars of international reserves, which are being kept mostly in the West. And so the Europeans are scared, and Americans probably too, that if Chinese take away the reserves from the Western financial system, it will depreciate the US dollar as well as the European currency. But come on, the case should be made that we shouldn't be worrying too much about Chinese reserves. We should worry that Russia would pay the fair price for invading Ukraine. So all the other countries who have big central bank reserves, like China or any other place, would think twice before invading their neighbors. Because if we do not make a price of invasion of Ukraine, illegal invasion, high in monetary terms, right? In terms of how much money Russia loses, then the many more aggressive totalitarian powers and dictatorship and strongholders in all over the world will have something example to follow. And I think overall, to conclude, that the two things I'd like to add, that Ukraine really needs this money, and we need kind of like stop discussing this politically, and we should move on to actions. I believe that this should have been done in the beginning of the war, getting those assets to Ukraine. It's like we're always late with these political moves, and we are always begging with the hand to give something to us. Well, we should take it. And the second thing, again, Ukraine should also be like a geopolitical and foreign policy actor, where it would not only accept solutions proposed by the European leaders or American leaders, but offer own solutions and lead the discussion. And well, also the obvious thing is that if Ukraine gets $300 billion of this money, well, it's obviously will be able to fund at least 2 more years of war easily and have lots of money left for the reconstruction. So far, Ukrainian finance ministry has approximately 40 billion bucks to fund the military. 40, while we can get 300. So that's the case. It's weird and it's strange that when Ukraine is in such a dire financial state and needs money to find its fight, we can't get it. It's like it would be a defeat of the international law if Ukraine won't get that money.
I agree that Vladimir Putin may not be concerned about losing those frozen assets, which have been frozen since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. But what he may be concerned about is that Ukraine can get a hold of this money and can use it to keep fighting, keep repelling the Russian invasion. Because Vladimir Putin doesn't want it to be that way. He doesn't want Russia to pay for this war. He's ready to pay for his part of the war effort, but he's not ready to support Ukraine with his own money. So I think that the reaction of Kremlin to even the discussion on the potential confiscation of Russian frozen assets show that they are pretty nervous about it, and this means this is the right move to make, and this move will actually influence the course of events and may put an end to this war, because this is a huge sum of money that can help Ukraine, especially when we are talking about the problems with American military aid. Vladimir Putin hopes that the so-called Ukraine fatigue, the change, the elections in the West, the American elections will make the political leadership of the United States, other Western countries in Europe, reconsider their support. So Vladimir Putin tries to continue this invasion for as long as it takes, in his opinion, to win. And these frozen assets can undermine the Russian ability to fight, because Ukraine will have almost as many financial resources to support its defense as Russia invests into the invasion. So I think it's very important to proceed with the confiscation of Russian frozen assets. This will be a game changer. Thank you, Ivan, for your time and for this interesting conversation.
Thank you, Sergey, and thanks to all our listeners for listening to this conversation.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Please follow Euromaidan Press on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow Ivan Verstyuk's social media accounts. You will find a lot of interesting stuff there too. The details are in the comments section below this podcast. Bye!